is looking at you, kid.
I'm Charles Foster Kane!
Hey, Stella!
Suck on this.
What is happening, everybody? This is Wrong Reel, episode 668, a podcast for hardcore cinephiles where we tackle everything from Shannon Worry to Bill Scurry, who happens to be my illustrious guest today for an episode likely to live in infamy. Naughty 90s Nostalgia, Part 5. Parts 1 through 4 are down in the description below. But this is our first that we're doing in video format, and it's fitting that Bill did both the intro and the outro to our new video version of Wrong Reel. And when we did 667 a few weeks ago, I wasn't anticipating having a month-long break between episodes, but that's just the way the cookie crumbled. But Mr. Scurry, welcome back to Wrong Reel. Are you ready to talk about some naughty 90s nostalgia?
I think there's nothing sexier than watching me talk about movies that probably raise my heart rate. I'm sure the audience would be happy to see this.
Now, you and I probably have different definitions of what naughty 90s nostalgia entails, but how would you characterize our first 4 episodes in terms of the topics, the genres, the filmmakers, the budgets involved in this unique phenomenon?
Oh man, I think we're lucky enough that we're out to 5 right now, and I think that we have this has been an annual tradition in January, I think, for the last this is the 5th year going now, and there's so much more to do. And here's the weird thing: when I look back at what we did already, it's almost like we're not repeating. Well, we may be repeating ourselves. Maybe I'm giving myself too much credit, but I think that the kind of movies we're pulling from along the way describe different precincts of pervy movie history, which again could have only happened in the 90s. And I mean, I don't think you could say that about sci-fi at a certain era. Maybe you could have said that about like UFO movies in the 1950s, the atomic age type stuff, where you could have like pulled from different sources of giant ant movie and fear of the Reds, fear of the bomb, fear of the commies, and all that stuff. But it's like the pervy naughty 90s stuff just keeps like giving. And I think the movies we're going to talk about today, they stand on their own too. It's like they too, I don't think thematically really step on the toes of what we've already talked about.
Yeah, we got a little art house, and we got, some mischievous fun. And then we have like just a full-blown like neo-noir, like proof of concept that unlocked the door to a giant sci-fi franchise. And so yeah, the 90s are a weird time where it seems like whether you're into art house or low budget genre films or kind of soft core exploitation films or just full blown big budget prestige films like Boogie Nights, nudity was everywhere. And I don't think it's any coincidence that it was like the last era of entertainment prior to the explosion of online pornography. But basically most people relied upon Playboy, Penthouse, that sort of thing. Maybe the occasional videotape that they stole from their older brother or whatever. But we were living in largely like almost like a porn-free era. And so I feel like one of the only ways you could get your rocks off was by going to the movies and actually seeing people doing it on the big screen. But I don't think all hope is lost. Like just last year, between movies like Poor Things or Saltburn or hell, even friggin' Oppenheimer, there was, I wouldn't say abundant nudity to go around, but enough where I didn't lose all hope in civilization. So clearly we're not alone in enjoying occasionally seeing adults behaving like adults on the big screen.
Yeah, I think Poor Things is exactly the kind of movie. I mean, I don't know if a guy like Yorgos Lanthimos could have made a movie that's that far out with the sort of Technicolor backdrops, the sort of studio filmmaking that he was doing, pulling out of the mothballs, with so much like frank sexuality. And not only that, but an A-list actor like Emma Stone, who's at the top of her power right now, decided to do a nude scene today. I mean, Julianne Moore took her pants off for any movie that came by. We had it easy through the late 90s because, leading actresses.
But it was directors like Robert Altman and Paul Thomas Anderson. And she wasn't like doing it like in skin flicks. She was working with like full-blown auteurs.
I mean, people forget that The English Patient has at least one full nude scene with Kristen Scott Thomas from head to toe, where her and Colin Firth. No, it's not Colin Firth. It's Ray Fiennes. It's like that's Anthony Minghella. That's the whole Miramax machine. That is that Merchant Ivory. I forget which whatever.
That was Miramax. Yeah, that was Miramax.
It was Miramax. To the point where it's like that was part and parcel to prestige filmmaking, and especially the way we thought about it. Those are European actors. That was like, oh, they're so elevated. Like French actors and British actors and German actors have no truck with nudity. That's why there's nude beaches in Saint-Tropez.
We still have our puritanical East Coast hangups and that sort of thing. But if you look at the history of Kristen Scott Thomas from the beginning of her career up to the present day, nudity is not a big deal. I mean, and also I feel like we make way too much of it. And one of the reasons I feel like compelled to keep making these videos or these podcasts on this topic, it was a great little private victory when I saw last year Criterion Collection or the Criterion Channel doing like a month of 80s and 90s erotic thrillers. And of course, like, when you say, oh, we're celebrating, neo-noir, blah, 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 you can give it all this elevated terminology. But what it boiled down to is they were watching movies like Body Heat or some of the movies that we're talking about today and celebrating them for exactly the same qualities that we like them. I mean, in the end, can these movies stand on their own in the absence of sex and nudity? Probably just fine. But it's a deal sweetener. It's icing on the cake. And I can't remember, what's that line from Boogie Nights where Philip Baker Hall says something like, I like watching movies on film. I like watching people fuck on film. Like, is that maybe a pervert? I don't know. But like, yeah, some line, and only Philip Baker Hall knew how to deliver lines.
I like a lollipop in my mouth and butter in my ass. Now that's just what I like.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, what's crazy is how we've done we're on our 5th episode of Naughty 90s. We have not yet tackled Boogie Nights in the context of Naughty 90s nostalgia. And that's
like, what I'm saying. That's what we're not in yet. Yeah. And not only that, but it's like not Criterion wasn't the only, like Karina Longworth like 2 years ago did her on you must remember this. She did the Pervy 90s series too. And it's like, look, I'm not going to say anybody ripped us off because this is a pretty small operation around here, generally speaking. However, I know that we planted a flag out here in terms of like, this is the series we're doing for the reasons we're doing it and trying to be analytical about it as much as we're being like prurient. It's like, it's worth talking about. And like real credible people have gotten into this after we started doing this. So
I love Karina Longworth and some of the episodes the episodes she did on Star is Born, the one from the 70s, one of the greatest podcasts that I've ever heard in all my life. And I was howling with laughter hearing her describe just the chaos and insanity behind the scenes. But the reality is, a lot of girls are into this. Like you mentioned English Patient. I remember the scene that got most people off on the English Patient was not the sex scene, but it was watching Ray Fiennes sew back together the garment of Kristen Scott Thomas after he ripped it off of her for the ravishing. The fact that he would delicately sew it back together for girls like, oh, and so it just shows how there's a wide range of tastes and sensibilities when it comes to eroticism in film and that sort of thing. And in the 90s, we saw shitloads of filmmakers around the world tackling erotica in a variety of ways. And all three of these movies today are movies that you chose. And I think you did a great job of picking a wide range of movies because one of them I'd never seen. One of them I saw in 1994 when it came out. And one of them I had just seen recently for the first time. And so I got to kind of like look at these movies, like representing different chapters of my life. But it is interesting revisiting a movie like Sirens 30 years after seeing it as kind of a horny and curious, but kind of bored 17-year-old boy versus like a 47-year-old man now. But let's start at the beginning. Our first movie from 1992, which I had not seen prior to getting prepared. Make the pitch. What is The Lover? Who's in it? Who directed it? And I guess just to tee us off, I've got a little taste from the trailer just to get us going.
Time, 17, and Playboy. All hail Jean-Jacques Annaud's brilliant new film. One of the most provocative cinematic experiences of our time. The Lover.
And I finally know how to say Jean-Jacques Annaud's name. I've been calling him Annaud, like a idiot redneck American for decades. At least according to that trailer, Jean-Jacques Annaud.
Yeah, I heard when it was the trailer for 7 Years in Tibet also had a voiceover, and it's like from Jean-Jacques Annaud, the director of The Bear. That's what I remember hearing his name in the first place. But what's the pitch on this movie? I'm glad you asked. Well, this is an adaptation by Jean-Jacques Annaud, French French director. He did make The Bear. He made some like weird ass bullshit. He did. He
did The Name of the Rose, a Tony Stella fave.
Yeah, that's true. And I get him confused with Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who did Amélie, but that's not him at all. I think Jean-Pierre Jeunet did Alien Resurrection too, and that's
as well as Delicatessen and City of Lost Children. But it was a filmmaking duo, but they eventually split.
Yeah, so Jean-Jacques Annaud is a French director the way we used to think of them, crossing over, making prestige films for English language audiences. And the Bear is exactly that. The Bear was sort of like pantomime. It was literally watching a bear go through nature, and it's like a dialogue-free movie that was supposed to look like quasi-documentary, and he's being hunted by a French trapper, and a little bit of the incredible journey. Anyway, it's a concept movie. So yeah, this guy's got like a weird position, a weird draft in history. Now he teamed with Gerard Brock, who was Roman Polanski's guy to write the script for this, and this is an adaptation of a Marguerite Duras autobiography. I believe it was called The Lover. Pardon me. And Marguerite Duras was Indo-Chinese. I don't even know if that's a term we can use anymore, but she was half French and half Vietnamese from the colonial era. So she grew up in a series of plantations until she relocated to Paris and France and finished her schooling as like a young woman. But apparently she had this really randy coming-of-age summer where she was having liaisons with this really wealthy British educated, like Eton educated Hong Kong scion, a fine-boned, wealthy child of rich parents and so the woman in this case who's playing the amanuensis, or I don't know what you call it, the alter ego, I should say, of Margaret Duras is an actress named Jane March, and she was a British actor who was, I think she was just a schoolgirl at the time. And she has this very peculiar look in that she is a young girl, and yet there's something about her that, again, I think she sort of sets off a lot of perv alarms because she kind of projects upwards in terms of her body and her look. She's got pillowy lips, and she actually appeared in Color of Night. She was Bruce Willis's the psychotic girlfriend.
Yeah, 2 years later, which is covered on a previous episode or installment of Naughty 90s Nostalgia. And yeah, I mean, she was 17 for about 2 months during the shooting of this, and then turned 18 while shooting it. And the big debate is when and where and how were certain scenes shot, because the legal age of consent in France is different than in America. And so right away we have a culture clash where like our delicate sensibilities as East Coast Americans, like, what, how dare you cast a 17-year-old girl in this movie? But as written, she was 15 by the author, and she is emotionally sophisticated. And like, people can judge all these movies precisely how they feel so inclined, but she is definitely one of those actors or one of those characters who is curious beyond her years, wise beyond her years, and also just sick and tired of living in this goddamn boarding school where her kind of poverty-stricken family has kind of consigned her.
Yeah, it's a miserable story where it has all of the the sort of hallmarks of penury. It's like they are definitely a poor family, but they are French, and it's a mother raising 2 children, and it just really
3 children.
3 children. Right. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. And she's super, super strict. She's sort of hard on everybody. She had these 2 sons she's driving into the ground. And this girl, her only like chance of escape is eventually going to Paris and becoming a fine French woman, sort of leaving behind, I guess, that sort of Vietnamese identity. Not that she ever really would totally. So this is almost like the last step. You're sort of seeing the last summer before she takes off and goes to Europe. And, the guy is played by Tony Ka-Fai-Leung, which I haven't seen too many movies with him. I think he was in Election, the Johnny To movie, maybe in the last movie, the first movie I saw him in from 2005. But he's got a gigantic repertoire. Yeah,
not to be confused with the Tony Leung that we all know from like Hard Boiled or like In the Mood for Love, a different Tony Leung.
Yeah, they have the Chinese have 2 different nicknames for them. Like one is this Tony, and I forget one is that Tony. So but that's what we call them. I mean, with the English language names, I'm sure that they use their Mandarin or Cantonese names.
But knowing how Tony Leung eventually turned into this massive superstar, he would have been perfectly cast in this flick as well had they gone down that road.
Yeah, and the other Tony Leung did a lot of these roles in Wong Kar-wai movies. It's like he too had the greaseback hair and the sort of like old he was in 2046 and In the Mood for Love and these things, and he too looked like incredibly sexy, ready to go. Guy from that era, just really put together, suave and sophisticated. The weird thing is,
Express, he's incredible, but in the end, Hard Boiled, him and Chow Yun-Fat throwing down, tough to beat.
But in this movie, Tony Ka-Fai-Leung, I guess I'll say Leung. He's ADR. He's been dubbed over by an English language actor, which I mean, he can speak English. It's always distracting, and it always feels like, come on, man, these guys grew up in Hong Kong. They speak English personally. It's just that was a shitty decision by the producers to like, oh, let's just not take any chances.
And Jane March sounds a little dubbed over as well, like her accent and her way of speaking. She was an untrained actress at this point. She was basically a model. And so as you're watching the movie, it's like I was finding the movie interesting. And of course, like the more sinful, forbidden elements are beautifully shot and that sort of thing and very provocative. But it is hard to get emotionally invested in a story where both actors have this kind of strange, unidentifiable, dubbed over quality. Like, where are they from and who are these people speaking on their behalf?
Yeah, and it sounds. I can't help but think it sounds like when Alicia Witt in Dune, when she's playing Alia, is like looped over by a full-grown actor.
100%.
It's just so fucking bizarre. Yeah. My brother's coming with many Fremen
warriors. Oh God, it's so weird. But the voiceover that does work in this, or the acting that does work, is they brought in for the to read the parts from the actual manuscript itself. They brought in legendary French actress Jeanne Moreau, who had obviously been in movies like Jules and Jim and The Bride Wore Black. And I have a little taste from the trailer. I had to keep it real short because YouTube kept flagging it, but here it goes.
We are lovers. Every day we go back to the bachelor's room. We can't stop loving.
We can't stop loving. The story of the life of shared by me and Bill Scurry. But yeah, for people who don't know who Jeanne Moreau is, watch her like in The Chimes at Midnight and The Trial, directed by Orson Welles, or watch her in her collaborations with Francois Truffaut. Watch her in her collaborations with Louis Malle with things like Elevator to the Gallows. But she is true French acting royalty. But by 1992, was no longer the luminary that she once was. So it's cool seeing her not come out of retirement, but getting an opportunity like this to kind of class it up a bit, because she is basically reading the story of her life to us, and we're just seeing these little vignettes from her childhood.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting construction. Was first of all, you keep it French, and I mean, I think Jeanne Moreau's, even speaking in English, her sort of like Gauloisie cigarette tone vocal cords still sound like her, even deeper and darker and more tanned by smoke than you could possibly imagine at this age. But it's kind of like a nice little smear over the top of the thing, trying to like cement the Frenchness and cement the gloss of a classy project like this. And I thought of two other French films that were, I guess French-made films, but one is Blue is the Warmest Color by Abdelatif Kechiche, and Bertolucci's
Last Tango in Paris, or
Last Tango. Sorry, I have my notes here. Yeah, Last Tango. In terms of movies that are, they sort of lead with like their sex forward, and it's no coincidence that these are three movies all made by dudes, and they have very specific ideas.
Sometimes girls will make these, like Fat Girl by Catherine Breillat, just as transgressive as anything made
if not more. Absolutely,
if not more so. So I feel like men will definitely photograph beautiful girls in their late teens in a slightly more lascivious way, but I think girls can go to the dark side. Let's go to the dark side in different ways.
Yeah, look, I'm not judging it because, I don't know how many of these movies we've watched have been directed by women. I think a grand total of maybe one total, if even one. I think these are all directed. I think there's something to be said about the male, whatever you call the male gaze. It has produced some of this crazy-ass sexy art. It was one of those drivers of the 1990s. That's what made this stuff happen. And it's like,
it's been driving art since the days of cave paintings. One of the first things people did when they decided to put a brush to the side of the cave is like, I'm going to draw the hottest naked woman in my mind as I possibly can. So it's like one of those things where for 20,000 years, people have been attracted to drawing and or filming or recording or writing about, beautiful naked people.
And what about the curvaceous fertility sculptures, like those?
Exactly.
Right. It's like it is one of the very first things.
Girls that look more like a stalactite than a person, but it is to represent fertility and childbearing and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and so I think like Last Tango, this is supposed to use sex to show character, and it's like that's something that's difficult to do. It's a tightrope walk. Because I think, you can show, character through action is great. You talk about a different layer of filmmaking. If you use fight scenes, if you use stunt scenes, if you use car chases, you could show character through action in so many things. And I think you could use sex to show character through action. And that's pretty much like Last Tango. has some dialogue and stuff like that, but I'm not sure if Last Tango is like saying, "Oh, listen to what he's saying," so much as watch what they're doing, and that's what the whole point of it is.
Or Blue is the Warmest Color, yeah, or any of these flicks.
And so, like Jean-Jacques Annaud is trying to say, it's like the story for this is watching a sexual awakening in this woman and seeing it's like, what is this sort of tenuous connection between the guy and the girl? This is not going to last at all. It's not going to stick around for a long time. They're both going in two different directions, but it's like, these two comets sort of bang into each other.
But it's interesting because the story takes place 100 years ago. And obviously, I mean, racism has always been around, but you're dealing with the relationship between a young white girl who's more or less kind of poor and an Asian man who's extremely wealthy and extremely powerful. And so it kind of implodes some of the normal lenses or narratives that we would see in a more kind of Western setting and that sort of thing. So I do like how it's a little more unpredictable in that respect. And over the course of the movie, I mean, her fucking older brother, who is just a useless human being in so many ways. And I kept hoping, like, can't like the Vietnam War just start early and just like get this guy out of here. But sadly, he sticks around for the bulk of the movie. But I guess I just got to ask you point blank, do you like the movie? Because as I was watching it, I was like, not really liking the movie. It's beautifully shot, and it definitely creates an incredible sense of setting. But I didn't necessarily even find it arousing, nor did I even really want to find it arousing. I guess when I was younger, like when I was like a 17 or 18-year-old kid, I was always attracted to like mature, sophisticated women, or also more kind of like bosomy or curvaceous women and that sort of thing. Like I always liked the idea of these like maternal women who can like teach you things or show you things. I've never really been preoccupied with like, relationships between like older men and young women. And here we have a 32-year-old guy and a 15-year-old girl. I don't necessarily get like, get my rocks off by watching those kinds of settings. And I'm not like above it or anything like that. It just doesn't happen to be how my taste and preferences naturally kind of point me.
No, in fact, you're telegraphing my own response. This movie I found kind of a bore, and I found that it was so far and it was in between trying to be Bertolucci. I thought it could kind of be Wong Kar-wai. I think Wong Kar-wai was sort of winding up at that point in like 92. He had made a bunch of movies in the late 80s and early 90s. He was becoming Wong Kar-wai. But I think like this had those some of those aspects of what Wong Kar-wai would do with romanticism. But I found it was so stiff. Like what I was looking for was either sociology of what the fuck was Vietnam and Hanoi and Saigon looking like at that time, because that's always really interesting. Is like, show me something through your eyeballs that could only have existed the way you saw it, and take me on a time capsule trip to what your childhood was. And it's like, well, so much of this was shot inside a soundstage. I mean, there's long stretches of this where they're just boning inside of a flop, essentially. Yeah. And you hear
the outside world kind of going right by. Like it's basically, you're on the street, you open up the door, and then you're inside, like, I guess like a bachelor pad, which a lot of wealthy Chinese men were expected to keep purely for the purposes of seeing their mistress, because the cultural norms that he has to adhere to. He cannot marry any woman who is not a virgin, but they're all expected to kind of, go out and experiment and that sort of thing. So immediately marriage is off the table. They can just enjoy the affair for whatever it is, for however long it lasts. But I think the one moment of the movie that really worked for me was after their first time they get together, he's asleep and she's on the bed, and we're hearing John Moreau doing her voiceover. And the way she's describing the outside world. And it's basically like you can, through the slates covering the windows or the blinds, imagine all these people going by. And there's something really cool about like when you're lying there sweaty and nude on the bed with the entire world going about their day, and they have no idea that right behind that door are these two naked individuals who've just spent themselves on the act of coupling and that sort of thing. And I thought that moment was wonderfully atmospheric and really captured what a lot of people feel like during like the post-sex cool down.
Yeah, there wasn't a ton of that. I mean, I think that it winds up being repetitive. It's like, that was an interesting bit of sociology. That was the experience, the lived experience of what this person went through. And, like, I love the opening scene where she gets on this sort of flat pontoon ferry to cross over the river. It's the milky yellow, muddy river, essentially that carries all that nutrient-filled water to the rice waddies. And she's on it with a bunch of people, and there's like belch of smoke belching buses and all these like cows and farmers with their wares, and behind it comes this like Bentley or this Rolls Royce with, you know, and this is the first time they're even getting close to each other, but it's like two different worlds.
A luxury tank from 100 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, it's like you know, every single bumper has been buffed to a shine. You know, he's got a driver up front who goes out there and like or make sure that thing is clean. And it's like that's next to the poorest people in all of Southeast Asia. And it's like, you know, she's at the railing and she sort of takes note of this. She doesn't know who's inside, and I think we can tell.
Her look is she likes her in a fedora with pigtails. So the fedora makes her seem very sophisticated and kind of old beyond her years. But the pigtails remind you, oh, she's a young girl playing an even younger girl.
Yeah. I mean, but ultimately, I think what the movie has to say is sex. I mean, which again is great. I mean, let's do that, honestly. And let's get as high gloss as you can think of. This is attempting to be a fine French film. It is Jean-Jacques Annaud is making a movie with copious amounts of nudity and simulated sexual situations from what on film is going to be a very prurient combination that looks like it's definitely a power disconnect, but it's trying to say something about both what the older guy needs in his life and what the younger girl is going to get out of this too. And, you know, we already know that Marguerite Duras becomes herself in France. She becomes a woman of letters, a bellatrix, a bellettrist, I guess I should say. Bellettrist.
And the way she's writing about this experience, it's not like, oh, woe is me, or oh my God, I was on the receiving end of all these horrible abuses. This is just like, these are her formative experiences that turned her into the person she eventually became. And so I feel like people almost seem to actively seek out and crave overly simplistic narratives. And if you're looking for an overly simplistic narrative or explanation for this movie will be frustrating on that front. So it got more dimensions to it, but there was a little bit of controversy when it came out about whether or not actually any sex was had on the set, because the director almost seemed to be kind of like implying that more had gone on the set than in actuality, because he was trying to promote the movie. But here's what Jane March had to say about that hype. Jane March denied that she and Tony Kaifei-Lung actually made love. She said, "I never had sex with Tony on or off the set. It's as simple as that. All the sex scenes were done with careful choreography and body doubles." Director Jean-Jacques Annaud falsely implied the sex was real to boost publicity. Thus, the sex-crazed English tabloid press trumpeted the rumor on its front pages for days, making life so miserable for March and her family that she got physically sick and had a nervous breakdown. March then fled to some French city to escape. Annaud later stated that the sex was not real. "At first, I was flattered people believed the sex, but after that, I stopped doing press in Britain. Of course, they didn't have sex." So that puts an end to that. I mean, it's all implied and more or less kind of sort of tastefully done. But yeah, I think if people are looking for movies where they can just like get their rocks off or get turned on or get hot, I don't think The Lover is that, which I guess leads me with the question, who is The Lover for, and how would you recommend it for those who are curious?
I think The Lover is a little bit consigned to the dustbin of history because I haven't heard it. You know, you watched it this week or recently. I'm saying that's when you watched it for the first time. I remember this movie when it came out. I remember reading the in my Long Island daily newspaper. I remember reading the reviews from John Anderson in New York Newsday, and where he talked about this is a movie with it's filled with sexual situations. It's a scandalous movie. And it was just absolutely whooping up my 17-year-old brain into thinking, oh man, this is definitely something I think I need to see. This sounds like, this is a sensation. Hey, we're in the middle of it now. This is the 90s. And the weird thing is this movie's regarded to the dustbin of history. It's not a movie anybody champions, even though it's got all these pieces.
It came out the same year as Basic Instinct. Like, how the hell are you supposed to be scandalous or get attention when you come out in the same year as arguably the greatest erotic thriller ever made?
Yeah, that there's something in the water that year. You're absolutely right. But who is this for? I think it's for completists. It's for the purpose of something like this.
If you are a 17-year-old girl with aspirations of being a novelist, then it might be of interest. I feel like if you have pretensions of being a sophisticated author, but at the same time recognize that you have to go out and actually have a life and live a life before you have anything to write about, I feel like maybe there's where the movie's at its most successful. But I believe it when Jean Moreau is reading the voiceover narration. I don't believe it when Jane March is talking about her aspirations as a writer. Jane March, she just does not convince me on that front.
Mariel Heller made a movie, I think it was 2017, called Diary of a Teenage Girl. And that was an adaptation of another, a book. And that too was another imbalance between mom's boyfriend and teenage girl were getting together. And it was like her sexual awakening is very symmetrical to this. And that was Belle Powley, the British actress, doing an American accent playing the young girl. And that was Sarsgaard playing the guy. And so everyone knows what Sarsgaard looks like. He's all lean, Swedish muscles and all that shit. And I think that that's a much more successful version of this because it was told. It is a story written by a woman, and the movie is directed by a woman, and it's from the girl's point of view. And so it's like, if that's what you're looking for, the kind of like touchy sexual politics, you can find it done better down the line in a movie like Diary of a Teenage Girl. But it's like, I think that this is more a time capsule of the 1990s type shit that, you mentioned English Patient before. Seinfeld made a couple of jokes about the English Patient in one of their episodes in terms of they went on a date to see the English Patient. And Seinfeld also had a running joke about a European art house nudie movie called Rochelle, which everybody will remember. It was a young girl's erotic journey from Milan to Minsk. And it's like, I guarantee that was Larry David making fun of stuff like this, the stuff that he would see on marquees in New York City. It's like, oh, I know what they make in Europe. They make nudie movies with young girls, and
that's
like
the the 50s. Like Woody Allen has admitted that the first time he saw a Bergman movie was because he heard that there was a nude scene in Summer with Monica, which in the mid 50s was very rare. You did not get to see nudity in movies ever at that time. And so his love affair with Bergman started then and there. And so when it comes, we talk about like Skinamax in the 90s and that sort of thing, but like most of the foreign films that I saw growing up were because I watched them late at night on Cinemax, hoping and praying that maybe there would be a scene like the scenes we have in The Lover, which would make all these subtitles in foreign language or poor dubbing totally worth it. And so, that's just in the 80s and 90s. I think that was the norm for a lot of bored teenage boys who were too young to go out, but were horny enough where they wanted to see some skin late night.
And the French directors and the British directors and, guys like Ken Russell and Peter Greenaway and these directors who were very and Verhoeven, of course. Verhoeven, who else tackled sex more frankly? We're not talking about the naughty 70s and the naughty 80s and naughty 90s, but it's like those exactly the kind of directors who made a niche of like, we're going to shoot sex. We're going to shoot sex workers, like that movie, his first movie, Business is Business, which is like 1971 and 1972. It's like, it's an incredibly sexy movie. It's an incredible document. It's, it's all about a woman's voyage through the sex trade in Amsterdam. And it just feels night and day different from something like this, which is also has sex on its brain. But this is just so reverent, whereas other movies are made so free-flowing and sort of like spontaneous. They feel like human beings actually live the story.
Verhoeven never forgets to let his movies be entertaining. And it's like, I think what they kind of forgot with this movie, it feels mostly like vitamins, but none of like the spice or the sugar or the flavor that you would expect with something like this. So it's like, if you're going to give me a scantily clad kind of scandalous drama or whatever, like you got to, at a certain point, deliver the excitement. Like Basic Instinct has the excitement, and like Paul Verhoeven knew exactly what it's doing. Or like Boogie Nights, like it knows exactly what it's doing. When Roller Girl takes off her top for the first time. If you're going to sell yourself as one of those kind of forbidden dramas, then at a certain point you have to deliver. I don't think The Lover's trying to go that route. I think it's trying to go for a much more pretentious, more sophisticated, kind of art house friendly, awards friendly route. And it did relatively well internationally. It only did okay in the US, but it did not lose money. It did just fine at the time.
For some reason, I kept thinking of Matilda May running around Tobe Hooper's Life Force, totally nude. And I'm like, well, all right, there's a young woman who that was her first role. She was a dancer. I bet you she was all 19 or 20 years old when she did that. And everybody remembers Life. I love Life Force, unironically. I think
12 minutes of footage, but that's the only reason people watch that movie.
I think it's a great movie. I think it picks up the sci-fi movie that Tobe Hooper tells so well, is that in addition to what I think is a great exhibition of practical and optical effects, you have this nude woman running around Life Force. And it's like, man, give me that. For some reason, a small little bit like that, completely gratuitous nudity, is somehow more sexy than this entire movie, which is about sex, with an actress who decided to take all her clothes off. It just doesn't add up to me.
Yeah, what's that line in Videodrome when they're watching footage early on? Someone's like, it's like they're basically making the point that good taste and sex don't necessarily go together when it comes to entertainment. I don't buy into any rule. I don't have any like real like kind of laws of filmmaking when it comes to what works and what doesn't. All we can do is just judge the final product. And I think of these three, The Lover is the kind of the least provocative or the least exciting. But should we move on to one that made quite a splash, no pun intended, in the mid-90s?
The antonym, yes. Do you have a clip that we can lead this off with, by the way?
I'll give a little taste from the trailer, and then we'll dive into Sirens from 1994.
You lie on the ground with your eyes closed while he licks your belly button.
You're really shocking.
We'll teach them.
Try one of these.
You like her, don't you?
Shocking. Yeah, nothing's more shocking than an Australian movie about sexuality forcing a prudish British priest to come to terms with how people's deeply held beliefs should not necessarily be able to negatively impact or constrain the ambitions of a great artist like Norman Lindsay. And all this whole debate about religion versus art was totally lost on me. When this movie came out, I was a junior or senior in high school. I'd grown up looking at Elle Macpherson on Sports Illustrated swimsuit issues. That's the reason we saw it. That's the reason we all showed up, blah, blah, blah. But having revisited it, it's better than I remember. And I did enjoy it. I love Sam Neill. I loved Hugh Grant. I love the kind of the friendly debate between those two characters throughout the movie, but also just all the girls in the movie are delightful, and just seeing all their little journeys and all their little arcs and narratives within it. I think Sirens somehow, in spite of what I might have felt at the time, has aged remarkably well and remains a pretty enjoyable movie.
Yeah, well, thematically, what it's saying in terms of it is, in a way, a standard bearer for a lot of what these real sex-forward directors are trying to say is that, let's not be afraid of sex, let's not be afraid of nudity, let's not be afraid of the human body. And using Norman Lindsay against Hugh Grant's Anglican pastor, preacher, holy cleric, or whatever the fuck his rank would be in the church. It's a great straw man argument because it's like Hugh Grant is there to get stepped on by everybody. He's essentially playing the perfect patsy just to get steamrolled by all this great sexuality and these naked women and the really heavy sexual, overtly prurient atmosphere. There's in addition to the heat,
libidinous.
It is libidinous. It is. The opposite of puritanical, all those things.
Yeah, because everybody in this little estate in the middle of the Australian outback, they have no hangups whatsoever. People in town have hangups, and they have all these rules they adhere to. But if you're on the estate of the artist, his wife, his models, they have a very relaxed attitude, and they're just trying to create kick-ass art and of a frank nature, and they're all invested and they're all engaged, and they love playing dress up and they love the whole deal. But whether you're talking about Ben Mendelsohn, the local lad from the village pub,
that's right, the
local religious leaders, everybody's frowning upon the shocking, scandalous paintings that are coming out of this environment. And when you see them now, you're like, oh my God, it's a naked girl on a cross. Who fucking cares? But once again, 100 years ago, people very much cared.
Yeah, it's like the Australians had their moralism, and their prudishness handed down by the Anglican Church. They really, they weren't that far away from being the penal colony. So it's like their values were really thought of as, they're in line with what was going on out of Canterbury or wherever the seat of the Anglican Church was. And so, the point of this story is that Hugh Grant and his wife, Tara Fitzgerald, get into a steamer. And they go all the way around the globe. I'm assuming it must have taken weeks.
They're sent on a mission, under orders, to convince the artist to compromise and have fewer of his scandalous works included in this upcoming exhibit. Yeah. That's like the mission. Can you get him to back down and not show all of his paintings?
I like how he's supposed to do like a soft elbow. He's supposed to convince him to do so, not necessarily, demand him to not do it, but through the power of cajoling and wheedling and sort of inveigling.
Like nightly academic debates between religious figure and artistic figure. And Sam Neill, you can tell, is just having an absolute blast, like screaming and hamming it up. But I fucking love Sam Neill. I've loved Sam Neill my entire life. I've been watching him my entire life in all kinds of movies. I like seeing him have a role like this where he's not necessarily hogging center stage, but when he's on stage, he totally dominates.
Yeah, he's one of those guys. This is only 1 year after Jurassic Park. It's about 5 or 6 years after Possession. Like he was kind of
things like that.
Yeah, Deadcom. The thing is, he is an actor that actors love to work against, because there's nothing about him that's selfish. Even if he's nominally the leading man, it's not like he completely absorbs the movie and takes it over and occludes performance from other people. He seems to be a very giving man, and I just think it's in his character to be part of this tapestry, even though he is the mouthpiece and sort of the driver of this stuff. I can't help but feel like all the other actresses in this movie are the ones doing the heavy lifting.
It's the Tara Fitzgerald show all the way.
Yeah, Tara Fitzgerald, that's the thing, is that Hugh Grant is so repressed, and the Anglican is allowed to have sex with his wife, but you can just tell he's not really comfortable with
Along
sex.
those lines, I have a clip from the trailer illustrating that point.
A minister and his wife.
Do you want to?
I'm not sure.
Well, you don't have to decide now. You wake me up if you do.
I mean, I've heard some piss poor lines or piss poor invitations to sex in the past. I don't think that I've ever heard one less sexy than, well, wake me up if you change your mind. It's like, when sex is on the brain, when you need to get some venom out of your system, it does not wait for a little catnip to decide whether or not you're actually going to do the dirty deed.
Did it trip your sensors, by the way, that Hugh Grant coming in with his wife on a steamship across the ocean was how Bitter Moon begins as well?
The entire movie, I kept thinking, like, are these like weird, like first cousins, like where like the movies, like Hugh Grant and that, he's less repressed, but he's equally
frustrated. He's frustrated.
He's curious, but he never actually has like an outlet for his desires apart from just sitting there and listening to Peter Coyote, like, telling all these deranged, dirty stories and that sort of thing. But they would make an interesting double feature, but Bitter Moon is just so gruesome and dark and intense and hilarious in so many ways, but like Bitter Moon is so vastly superior. I would never say watch Bitter Moon and Sirens back to back. I think Bitter Moon is one of the great erotic thrillers, not even a thriller, just one of the great erotic dramas of the 90s. But Sirens is very enjoyable, and I laughed uproariously, and I love seeing how some of the models that Norman Lindsay works with, they're total exhibitionists and very frank about their nudity and love, playing strip poker with the boys in the evening. But then the other, what's the actress from Arrested Development? I'm blanking on her. Portia de Rossi. Yeah, she's very virginal and innocent, and it's like she's embarking upon her own sexual discovery. And the object of her affection is this hulking, blind, like specimen of manhood who kind of helps out around the estate, but he's always like, he's built like a Greek god, but he kind of like tiptoes around because his vision is impaired. But you can tell the girls are kind of delighted by his presence because they enjoy like teasing him and flirting with him and inviting him to swim and that sort of thing. And like sirens from Greek mythology, they're always luring men into the water.
Yeah, it's interesting because he, as you begin the movie by thinking, as they tell you that he's deaf mute, essentially, or no, he's blind and mute, but I guess he can hear is the thing, and so that's why they don't mind getting their knickers off around him, because they just assume that he can't see when they're about to bathe. But the interesting thing is that of all the characters in this movie, which is completely filled with nudity, female nudity from end to end, it is ironically that guy, he's sexualized the most out of everybody.
Oh yeah, laying by the water, having a little rub and tug by himself and that sort of thing. Yeah, this movie is not.
Yeah.
I loathe the expression the male gaze, because it just implies, oh, this is purely for the purposes of being turned on and like masturbating and that sort of thing. But if someone wants to accuse this movie of the quote unquote male gaze, I'm like, all right, well then it's also for the guys who like the fellas, because one of the most outrageous nude scenes is him just having a wank on the shores of the lake.
And he never, the rest of the characters go and give you a lot of personality. Like, Elle Macpherson's character and the brunette, I can't remember what the actress's name was. They have, fully developed arcs. They talk amongst themselves. They have, their own points of view that get exhibited throughout the movie. This guy, he just gets ogled the whole time. Yeah, he's a sex object for Portia de Rossi, and I mean he does have a little
objectifies him. How dare it?
And it's great, it's like I think that director John Duigan, Duigan, I never didn't bother learning how to pronounce the guy's last name. Call him Dugan for Christ's sake. It's like he is very intentionally doing this with the guy, where it's like. There's a little bit of an O. Henry ending where you figure something out about the dude that you didn't know, but maybe you could have
seen. Great twist. Yeah, Sam Neill.
That's a great twist.
Yeah. Throws him a hammer.
That's true. Yeah, he throws him a fucking hammer. It's great. But yeah, I mean, the story of this movie, though, the reason why we're talking about it is that it both manages to be light and erotic and romantic, and also I think it had that boundary pushing thing that a lot of directors wanted to do. The reason why so many of these guys were making sexy, nudie, naked, sexy movies in the 90s was to start to push the envelope to say, hey, we got to fucking cool off. And it's like, look at this shit. People were having the same discussion 80 years back.
Yeah.
It's like this is history repeating itself. And it's like, tell me that we haven't budged a little bit. Maybe libertinous, maybe sexual. It's like let's say that we're a little bit better and more evolved than those Anglicans back in the day. It's like, can we at least pretend that we like sex, and we're not going to shame the human body? We're not going to like pretend people don't like sex and have it and are nude, and you know, that kind of thing.
Fought anew with every generation. I feel like whether you're talking about from spiritual constraints, political constraints, societal constraints, wherever those constraints are coming from in any era, left, right, and center, you always have people wagging their finger in disapproval saying, don't do this, don't say this, don't make this kind of art, don't express yourself this way. And I feel like those battles have to be fought all over again each time, because those buzzkills and scolds and, you know, censors, they get reborn, and they don't have all the lessons that have already been internalized by artists and filmmakers and that sort of thing, generations past. And so you have to find a way, like, how do you fight a battle where to yourself it might seem abundantly clear and obvious? Oh, it's the most natural thing in the world for an artist to express himself through the use of naked models and that sort of thing. But people who, they, for whatever reason, we never seem to get tired of having this discussion. But what I always find it interesting is just seeing, where are those constraints coming from? Like when I visited the Vatican summer 2019, and they had all these beautiful statues that have basically been stolen and or inherited from Greek antiquity, where 1500 years after these statues have been carved, a bunch of priests in their infinite wisdom decided to slap fig leaves over all the naughty parts of all the models. And I'm like, so here you are, like a millennium and a half later, deciding those artists were wrong, that the art is beautiful, but you want the recognition of the art without any of the qualities that come with it. And we're seeing the same thing now, like people adapting Ian Fleming. Let's do Ian Fleming, but without the stuff that makes Ian Fleming, Ian Fleming. And so I just find it comical and depressing that this kind of shit keeps coming up. But I think Sirens, because it's so lighthearted, it allows us to explore these debates in a way that's not off-putting. It's not overly pedantic. It's not overly serious. If you just want to watch Elle Macpherson kind of taunting Tara Fitzgerald and trying to encourage her to come out of her skin a little bit, that's fine. Like, you can enjoy the movie just on that level and still have a good time watching it.
I'd like to praise Elle Macpherson for a minute, because first of all, I think she's only got 3-4 maybe speaking roles in movies where she played characters tops.
This is her first, yeah.
This is her first. I remember she was in Batman and Robin in '97, where she played George Clooney's girlfriend, and she had a couple of lines. She was okay, but she really wasn't doing any lifting there. She's mostly been, quote unquote, herself, you know. And Elle Macpherson, her nickname in the business back in the day was The Body. You know, she was among the, you know, the top 5 supermodels when that was a thing back in the
first cover I can remember from Sports Illustrated is the Thailand Fling cover from, I think, 86 or 87. But I remember I was so young and so illiterate, I thought it was Thailand. I didn't know what Thailand was. I was like, what the Thailand Fling? But I had Elle Macpherson with the Thailand Fling on my wall for fucking years before I ever learned where the hell Thailand was.
I mean, she is tall, she's Australian, she's tan, she's curvy. And not only that, I think she gained about 10 to 15 pounds 20. To do this movie.
Well, according to her, she gained 20 for the movie, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. She knew. And that's the weird thing, is that I remember I've said this years ago about David Cronenberg's Shivers, in that, what's her name? Marilyn Chambers. Marilyn Chambers was in Shivers. It's like she was
in Rabid.
Rabid. Okay, sorry, Rabid. Marilyn Chambers in Rabid is she was not a trained actress, but she had a lot of experience on film. And, you know, David Cronenberg was asking her to be an actor. And it's like, I can't help but think that her experience doing pornography informs the performance, and that she knows what to do with her body. There's just ways that people, like dancers, can do these certain things with their bodies as actors that other people have to sort of learn how to do. There's sort of an overall physical proprioception and prowess.
Also, actors like showing off how fucking ripped and beautiful they are, whereas a lot of actors who aren't necessarily that athletic will be very shy, naturally, because physically they're just less impressive individuals.
Yeah, and so Elle Macpherson has spent, by this point, 1994, she'd been in the business for probably almost a decade. And it's like, what was her job? Her job was to make sure that she fucking looked where they told her to look in front of the camera, her best angle, her best side, curve her back. You know, it's like she understood the lens and how to look. And it's like, based on that kind of comfort, being an editorial model for clothing lines and for swimsuit models, I think that being an actor, she shows a sort of a great degree of comfort with the delivery and the sort of projection. And I don't know how much direction that she needed from John Dugan.
Well, it probably also helps that it's just an Australian setting with us. They're not asking her to play like a suburban housewife in Maryland or something like that. She's getting to play a model in Australia, which is exactly what she is. So, not a huge reach.
But she's really good. My point is, she's really good, and she is again. She's so intimidating because she's so gorgeous, she's so naked, she's so sexy, and she seems to have she's not bashful at all about taking her clothes off. And it's like, that's why this is easily the greatest mixture of sex, romanticism, eroticism, nudity, prurience, and like a good, nutritious, like you said, the vitamins and vegetables
and wish fulfillment and things like that. Like seeing Tara, who obviously she's a loving, devoted wife to a religious figure, but she does get to have a little adventure on the side. And I love the little trick where she's trying to help Portia have like her first great experience with men, and she takes off her wedding ring and slides on her hands. Oh, it's for good luck, because she's under the impression that the blind man will feel that ring and think that it's her. But it's just an interesting, I enjoy, to borrow a term from Woody Allen, like a Midsummer Night's Sex comedy. Like, it's something about just people fooling around and having adventures. If people don't get to have these little adventures from time to time, they just go fucking insane. And we see how on the train, when they're heading home, Tara starts giving Hugh Grant a little foot job on the train. He's giggling, oh, we're going to be excommunicated and blah, blah, blah. But he's not stopping her. But Hugh Grant is not afraid of the physical act of love as like a full-blown movie star and that sort of thing. And I love seeing him play kind of the shy, awkward, guy who's bad at love and bad at sex and that sort of thing. Because we know in real life, he's dating women like Elizabeth Hurley and all that kind of stuff. But this is like the early days for Hugh Grant. Between this and Bitter Moon and Four Weddings and a Funeral, suddenly in 1994, he just like emerged fully formed into the international film scene and became an overnight giant fucking superstar. And he could not be more attractive and charismatic and that sort of thing. But I do enjoy seeing hot guys playing losers who can't get laid like he plays in this movie.
Yeah, it's funny because he's so interesting a character actor now. Like, he was great in The Gentleman from Guy Ritchie. Oh, yeah. It's like, I really and I thought he was accent. Like, when he played the sort of cannibal guy on horseback in Cloud Atlas, I'm like, all right, so you know what now, man? Hugh Grant is finally doing the thing that he wasn't allowed to do when he was making all that money back in like the late 90s, where he just sort of had to be the stammering prime minister from Love Actually, Yeah. And it's like, this is a character actor. Like, this is a guy who like is stage trained, and he's really fucking talented on top of having the chops. And so like him doing Lair of the White Worm for Ken Russell, I think that was 89 or 90 or thereabouts, 91, something like that. And then it's like, then getting into this Julia Roberts swipe of movies until he started becoming interesting again around, the turn of the 2000s.
That is least interesting doing crap like Notting Hill, which made me want to go on a fucking murderous rampage. But my parents liked it. They made me go see it with them.
Yeah, but it's like, I thought the same thing about Jude Law. When Jude Law finally went the fuck back to being a character actor, a supporting actor, it's like
Matthew McConaughey. Great. Yeah, good-looking guys who have more depth than just being a good-looking guy.
You're way more interested in being weird, unusual, rather than just sort of being a stammering romantic lead in a Sarah Jessica Parker movie. That's when I tuned back in again. And this is good Hugh Grant, like you said. He's part of the him versus Sam Neill is like, you mentioned the vegetables and the vitamins that it seemed like The Lover was all the sort of lesson. It was very icy, and it was trying to administer this stuff to you. It's like, this really dense. Yeah, this camouflages the you eat your broccoli, but you don't realize how fucking tasty it is because it's like covered in cream.
Well, it's almost like it's happening in the background. There's like the movie that it's ostensibly about, this debate between art and religion, but it's kind of happening in the background. And while they're having these fierce debates and they're screaming at each other, the camera would just kind of pan away and follow Tara Fitzgerald. And like, wait a second, I thought that's where the movie's happening. Like, no, the movie's happening over here. And so, yeah, there's a light touch to the movie, which I really like, but also just helps that it's beautifully photographed. I don't know if they used a helicopter or what at the end, but like just having that majestic shot of these five women who at this point we've seen them, naked a few times throughout the course of the movie, but seeing them like the sirens of old, tempting Odysseus, he's tied up to the mast of his ship with all of his men with their ears plugged, but only he can hear the siren call. You can believe it. You can easily see Odysseus screaming to be cut loose from the mast with those 5 beauties up on the cliff top.
That's a very striking last visual, but I think that even what kicks its ass is that when Tara Fitzgerald is laying in the pond at night and she's in shallow water. Oh, I mean, it is a beautiful thing, but it's also so it is lovingly gazing upon the female breast and the body, and they're dripping with water, and everything about it is perfect. It is every single aspect of sexuality you want, where it feels safe, it's a turn on, it feels like it's about the story you just saw. I mean, there's so many great things that John Dugan does, and it's like being able to shoot all that stuff, that this
And the cutaways of the
sexiness of it.
snake, like it gets almost very biblical, but we're constantly seeing like snakes like curling around like a cup of tea and knocking it over, or like slipping into the lake. Like, wait a second, is like one of these girls about to get bitten by a snake? But it's just always reminding you, like the devil and temptation are always around, but maybe it's a threat, maybe it's not. But I just like how it just introduces a little hint of danger into the movie.
Yeah, no, John Dugan is one of these directors. He's Australian, by the way, and he too has a resume of a bunch of movies. The most famous thing I think this guy did was a movie I saw called Romero, which was about I think he was the Archbishop of El Salvador who was assassinated back in the 80s. It was played by Raul Julia. I saw that they took us on a school trip to see this movie. It's a pretty consequential historical movie. I didn't realize it was made by an Australian
Why
dude.
Sargasso Sea? My girlfriend in college loved that movie, and she was always trying to make me watch it, and I never would. So maybe that's why we're not together. I should have watched John Dugan's other movie.
But the thing about him, yeah, no, it's true. I really like
that could be another installment for Naughty 90s nostalgia.
Put that on the ledger. I'm saying it's inexhaustible, but I think that this is one of those movies that also does that thing. I love it. Maybe it's a corny, cheap trick, a little bit of a cheat, but I love when people use the kind of wildness, the unpredictability, the surreal wilderness of Australia as this sort of like untamed thing that's out there to either frighten you, kill you, or it's an uneven, it's terra incognita.
I heard a stat. It's either 8 out of 10 or 18 out of 20 of the most dangerous animals in the world are all found in Australia. So it's like, or at least not the most dangerous, the most deadly. Like the things that's likely to kill you. So here you are, skinny dipping with Elle McPherson, having the time of your life, but meanwhile you're surrounded by spiders and snakes and lizards that will kill you as soon as they look at you.
Well, the first scene is like when they get there, it's clear that these two buttoned up English Victorians are, like it's so hot and they're just trying to pretend like it's still in England, like they're swatting flies away as they're wearing high necklines. And then she goes down to Tara Fitzgerald's character goes down to the water for the first time, and she's scared by the naked dude jacking it, and she runs away in terror, and she runs into a joey. There's a kangaroo. It's almost like it. I know that maybe in reality there would not have been a kangaroo there, but I just love the fact that like John Dugan is weaponizing Australia, saying here's a fucking kangaroo. This is how scary this place is. It's all over the place. The snakes, the kangaroos, the spiders, it's everywhere.
Yeah, well, I was just happily surprised that it plays as well as it does, because when you revisit something from your teenage years, and which I watched for I was watching it hoping just for like a porn flick when I was 17. And obviously it's not that. That's not what they were going for. And so I get why I was frustrated at the time that it was not Basic Instinct, which is what I craved at that age. But at 47, it actually is just a delightful, lighthearted movie about beliefs versus art and sexual awakenings and the way society likes to judge you. Like when they go to the pub and they're all dressed up and they just want to get a drink, and the ladies' room is closed and the men's room is just for men, and they're basically trying to bust their balls about not serving them drinks. And finally, Tara Fitzgerald points out, well, it's illegal to even be open on this day. So what the fuck are we even talking about? And finally, the girls get their drinks. But I love that little moment where we see Ben Mendelsohn, future Skrull of the MCU, and his buddy kind of shyly looking away, pretending like they don't know these models that they were just playing strip poker with the night before. And I just feel like society's hypocrisies when it comes to the physical act of love, it's always nice when it's pointed out in a way that's not, this is not a shrieking dogmatic movie. It's not like didactic. It's not in your face. It just throws out a few ideas that you can kind of wrestle with and discuss, but on the whole, a very enjoyable, very solid movie.
Yeah, this was a gift from a friend of mine back in 1994. A friend gave me the VHS cassette, and I don't remember, I hadn't seen it. I knew what it was by that point. He put it in my hand, and he said to me, Elle McPherson gained weight for this movie, and he walked away. That was the only bidding. I'm like, thank you so much.
What's the line about like models look better with their clothes on, but like porn stars look better with their clothes off, or something to that effect? But like the way men want I mean, I shouldn't make blanket statements, but in general, I feel like most guys like girls to be a little beefier, whereas girls sometimes, but not always, like girls who kind of look like coat hangers. Like I have three sisters who work in fashion, and if you can hang a dress on a coat hanger the same way you can on the model, like score, like that's the model we want to work with. But like someone who looks like a coat hanger is not going to necessarily look good with their clothes off. So yes, please put on the 20 pounds of curvaceousness for the evil male gaze that I employ.
But you know what else makes the I mean, again, watching it when I was given this on VHS was great because it absolutely was every single pervy prurient thing I wanted. And yeah, I'm just like you, where I feel like at 48, watching this movie now, it ages. Either I've aged with it. I love all the things I loved back when I was 24 years old when I watched it the first time. And it's like what I love even more now is Sam Neill's character. Sam Neill is just this guy. I mean, he takes a really benign creation of this painter, Norman Lindsay, who was a real guy. And luckily they sort of divorced him from the xenophobic, racist shit that the guy actually did. He was kind of a nativist back in the day. He had a lot of like anti-Semitic political cartoons and right-wing and anti-Asian, anti-Orientalist type shit that he was doing back then. And he makes him, you know, no shit. He's the guy we're supposed to get behind. He's the guy he's the piercer of shibboleths. You know, he's the sort of smasher of these stodgy ideas. And, you know, he actually, the word that he uses in the movie is wowserism or wowsers. And wowsers were supposed to be these really uptight, prim, puritanical people who just wanted to squash sex and pretend that people weren't naked and that husband and wife slept in separate beds.
Or they used to say for English women on their wedding night, like in the late 1800s, when they were warning them or trying to prepare them for the ordeal they're about to experience, they would say, just close your eyes and think of England. And it's always made me fucking laugh. But yeah, there will always be people who are shocked and horrified by the idea of taking your clothes off with another person and doing wet, slimy, grotesque things. And I'm like, then don't. But don't spoil the fun for the rest of us. If sex is gross to you, if nudity is gross to you, I'm not going to shove it down your throat. I'm not going to demand that people watch these kinds of movies and that sort of thing. But I feel like the definition of a buzzkill is somebody who they can't just step away. They have to spoil the good time for everybody else. And with this, the face of the buzzkills just changes depending upon the era and the climate and the environment in which you find yourself.
Yeah, you know, and not every one of these movies that we've talked about in Naughty 90s, and the ones we will get to even later, I mean, in the series as we continue this, they don't have this all on its mind as a mission statement where it's trying to push back at the shibboleths. It's trying to sort of be an anti-prude, you know, and John Dugan's
LA Confidential. LA Confidential is a kick-ass crime story. It just happens to have a plot device of hookers cut to look like movie stars. And that's why, all right, well, that's good enough to include it in Naughty 90s, because it was not part of Naughty 90s nostalgia. It's not the centerpiece, but Kim Basinger plays a hooker cut like by a plastic surgeon to look like, or at least they think she's been cut to look like Veronica Lake, but all she did was dye her hair. The rest is her, as she describes in the movie.
Yeah, and so it's like the 90s was able to tap dance through movies like this, which was, I mean, who knows? This was probably made for $5 to $6 million in Australia. It was probably dirt cheap to shoot. I'm sure it was a bunch of actors who were more or less unknown at the time. You know, but it totally gets it across the line. I mean, everything about it to me is successful. It's beautifully done. It has a nutritious sort of like crunchy story, like a nice firm backbone. It's got, you know, it's absolutely eye pleasing for every single minute of it. It manages to be sexy and a good meal, sort of like a hearty meal all at the same time. And that's, you know, the beauty of it is that some of these movies we've talked about, like I said, the series have this in mind. Some of them are just sort of like throwing the body against the fences, trying to break down.
Oh, yeah, I mean, some of them are like in that weird no man's land where they don't have enough money to be like a legit cop thriller, but they kind of are pretending they do. What is it? Is it Undercover Heat? The one that I pitched you at one point that we have not tackled yet. I think that's what it's called, with Athena Massey. Is that it? Hang on, I gotta.
Oh yeah, I remember.
I think it's called Undercover Heat from like 1995. But like some of these movies are just like full blown softcore flicks that are masquerading as Undercover Heat from 1995. But it's like they're masquerading as like something that they're not or can't quite pull off, but in the end, you're just watching it because it's got actresses like Rena Raphael, you know, throwing down. And so, but there is a place for that kind of junk food, the empty calories of a low budget kind of fake cop softcore porn flick. But that's one of the things that's beautiful about the 90s is that we just had so much fucking variety. And I feel like when I did my look back at the year 1999 recently, where for 2.5 hours, I just ran it through the entire release schedule for that year. The depth of different kinds of movies, different kinds of genres, different kinds of points of view. It's just astonishing how much has been lost. Like, because you and I have talked a bunch of times in the past about how we no longer have like the monoculture and everybody's watching different like sources of information and that sort of thing. But I feel like when it comes to movies, sometimes it does feel like we're living in a monoculture. Everybody's talking about like the same 2 or 3 movies. I wouldn't mind getting back to the 90s where we have hundreds more feature films being made per year that are designed for very like segmented marketplaces and that sort of thing.
If you look at, I mean, if you start in go back to 80 and then look up until like 1998, you know, that 1999, that stretch of like 20 years, every single weekend, I'm not saying every weekend was created equally, but if you look at all the quadrants which were served, that you can sort of like, I mean, this is no joke. Like Mr. Mom is out the same weekend as E.T., which is out the same weekend as like Out of Africa. I mean, I'm swishing shit together, but it's like that. It used to look like that. It used to be that you have a whole fucking spread in front of you. There was soup, there was bread, there was crudité, there was a steak, you know, and there's mashed potatoes and all this stuff.
Maybe a little brandy on the side and that sort of thing. Yeah, but there was definitely room for more tastes and sensibilities, I feel like. And I don't know what will have to change. I think what the reality is that we're just going to have to continue to throw out a very wide net, go to film festivals, watching international films. I don't think we can rely upon any one film industry of any one country to satisfy all of our needs. And it was probably ridiculous for us to ever assume that Hollywood as an entity could even pull that off. I just feel like now, as like connoisseurs of movies and or curators of cinema for other people, I think it's our job to just look in every single nook and cranny around the world, all the different streaming platforms, all the different film festivals, and just find the good shit where it is. But no country can be, I guess, good enough or consistent enough to scratch all the itches that we might have.
And I would say that with the exception of maybe Striptease, which we haven't talked about yet, but it's certainly on the table, almost every movie that we've talked about have been cheap to make. I mean, not in the mean, I'm saying overall that you do have some movies that had gigantic budgets in terms of sensual movies. I'm sure Billy Friedkin made Jade for quite a penny, and so did Verhoeven. He made Basic Instinct for a few bucks.
Basic Instinct looks great because it was expensive as fuck to shoot. The photography is gorgeous. Right.
But the nice thing is when you're going to do a movie with a lot of copious nudity and sexual themes, it's like that absolves you of having to do a lot of production. Unless, if that's your choice, it absolves you from doing, you don't have to do a lot of great photography. You don't have to make a lot of, location shoots. It's certainly not going to be effect heavy. You can more or less rely on a few locations, a few soundstage shoots, and some
Animal Instincts too. We just need one bedroom that we can use all the sex scenes. So wash the sheets often, but we're going to be using the set a lot.
They say you're the system. What is it? Then fuck the system. She says in that movie.
Well, on that note, let's move on to what I think is the strongest movie on deck today. But before we do, I need to have a quick pee break. So I'm going to have a quick little Shadowrun musical interlude, and we'll be back in hang on, I've lost my clip. Here it is. We'll be back in 2 minutes. So you ready? Are you ready to whip out your Super Nintendo and play a few rounds of Shadowrun after hearing that tune?
I loved NHL '94 is my favorite game for SNES. Like that thing, I played a whole fucking 2 years addicted to that game. It was insane.
Yeah, SNES, it had some good games. It was a game changer. But let's move on to a movie which I don't know how much of a game changer it was for a lot of people in 1996, but in the years since has absolutely been embraced as a huge game changer, and that is Bound from 1996, written and directed by the Wachowskis, who almost did this as like a proof of concept to Joel Silver to show that they knew what they were doing as filmmakers, which then opened the door to The Matrix, which was yet another game changer. But make the pitch for people who have not seen Bound. What's going on? Actually, you know what? Let me give you one quick taste, a quick clip, and then we'll get the official pitch from Bill Scurry.
Hi, my name's Violet. We heard you working in here, and I was just wondering if you'd like a cup of coffee.
An open invitation like Violet comes once in a lifetime.
That's steamy stuff. All right, so what the hell is happening there?
You know what? Like, honestly, this is a feather touch of a pitch. You don't need to go hard to put this into people's heads at all. I feel like this movie sold itself when it came out in '96, and it has only become colossal for the Wachowskis and for essentially, what it did for neo-noir filmmaking and for the careers of Jennifer Tilly and what's her name? Gina Gershon. And so, I mean, this movie at its essence is just, it could be a Fred McMurray movie from like 1942. There's so little that would need to be changed to put it back in the Hays Code era of filmmaking. It's amazing. When I went back and watched it this time, I mean, I've seen it twice in the last year or so, just sort of giving it its due again, wondering, it's like, did I really see what I thought I saw? Is it really that good? Could it really be this simple? And it's like, man, it is just purely a noir movie. It could have been Billy Wilder. It could have been, Dashiell Hammett. It could have been somebody back in the old days making this. Honestly, the thing it's got going for it is the same-sex thing, and that is what kind of flips this movie on its ear. And in 1996 dollars, the way that has sort of inflated over the years, that's what hadn't been seen before. And the Wachowskis looked like they were absolutely sagacious for finding the right thing to add into it, and then the way in which they did it, the way in which they massaged the lesbian component to make it, I mean, it's sold to every audience. I can't think of any quadrant that did not like this movie, with the exception of maybe like book banners and
it only grossed about $7 million at that time. So I think those who saw it recognized that it was really, really good. But I feel like it's its reputation in the years since, where people keep coming back to it and they keep rediscovering it. This is the definition of a movie with a long shelf life, because I think even if you throw out the same sex stuff, or throw out how both the filmmakers are trans, and like throw out all those other concerns, what you're left with is a down and dirty, like you said, Dashiell Hammett or Mickey Spillane or Raymond Chandler, just a kick-ass, hard-boiled story. And if you wanted to swap out Gina Gershon with Lee Marvin or Charles Bronson or Robert Ryan or Burt Lancaster, it would work. I mean, she drives a truck, she drinks beer, she likes seducing women and that sort of thing. She's good with her hands. She's done 5 years in prison. She's tough as nails. But there are not a lot of actors. There are not a lot of actresses out there like Gina Gershon, where it's like, we want you to do everything that you do, but also you need to be Burt Lancaster as well. I think this is the performance of her career. I love her in Showgirls. Gina Gershon and Jennifer Tilly are both really well cast in this.
They were so well directed. Like I forget who was talking about Jane March before. I don't know how these people were being directed. Lily and Lana Wachowski directed the two of them marvelously, and it both shows the fact that Gina Gershon was able to pull a jet out of a downward spiral pointing at the ground after Showgirls and kind of like repair her career with just a fucking sizzling fastball of a performance.
Even if that movie has turned out to age really well and have a very long shelf life as well. But at that time, people always forget it was considered a ruinous film for everybody involved. Now we love it. It was less trendy to talk about how much you love Showgirls in 1996.
Yeah, that's the side note of this, is that Colin McLaughlin did just fine after Showgirls. Gina Gershon did just fine after Showgirls. Yeah, it's Alan Rations did great after Showgirls. You know, like it only took down really Elizabeth Berkley. But aside from that, like, you know, it's Gina Gershon is an actress that, easily the performance of her career, and she's been in a lot of weird stuff. She's got strange taste. I don't know if she's got great management. It's hard to say. It's like there's no real through line between this and, like, she gets to do Killer Joe in, what year is that? 2013, 2014 for Billy Friedkin.
Or The fucking Insider with Michael Mann. I mean, she pops up all
yeah.
over the place. I mean, and she always brings it. She brings the heat, irrespective of the genre or the material.
She is like a knife crease pressed into pants, you know, just sort of all angles, lines, sharp edges, precision, sophistication. She does that shit really well. But the bigger story here for me is Jennifer Tilly, who'd been in so many movies up to that point, goofy comedies where she was tits,
Bullets of Broadway. She was fantastic in Bullets of Broadway, which was a couple years prior.
Let It Ride, I think, was a movie like 1986. She was in Moving Violations with one of the I think that was one of the Murray brothers.
I saw Moving Violations. You don't tell me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so also, was it the remake of The Getaway?
Oh yeah, that's true. The remake of The Getaway is it Roger Donaldson? I think did that. Yeah, with Michael. Her scenes with it's a really depressing.
And one of Marcus Penn's favorites, Heads from 1994.
Okay, I haven't had the pleasure of seeing that one, but this says to me that either Jennifer Tilly as well either had bad people who've been running her career. Oh, and Bride of Chucky, I think, gave her a real second life.
That was a few years later, but yeah, she's got that. She has a very breathy, whispery way of speaking, where with the right role, it is just sex on wheels. Where like like I showed in that little clip where she's whispering "kiss me," she has a way of saying her lines almost as if like she's having an orgasm as she says the line. And luckily, Gina Gershon can pull off being convincing as the person who is pushing her buttons and turning her on and that sort of thing. And as I was watching it again the other night, I realized everything that I love about The Matrix, you can kind of already see the DNA on display in this, like the famous one-shot sex scene where the camera's kind of pans all the way around them. And I was like, wait a second, that's the exact same shot going around Neo as he's dodging bullets in The Matrix. It's just less like kind of like freeze frame-ish, but like that movement is the same. And the color palette and the aesthetic and just some of like the background sounds, like those weird sounds you only associate with The Matrix, where it's like not quite music, not quite sound effects, but somewhere in between. I was like,
it's tone.
Yeah, they're already using them in Bound. And so, as I said, I think like a year ago when I did my, I think a top 10 90s erotic thriller video. But if you wanted to look at Bound as a story set within the Matrix before they've taken their red pill and left the Matrix, like, is Joey Pantoliano from the Matrix before he took his red pill, was he this guy in Bound? And on that note, I might as well play a little clip with the great Joey Pants himself.
What the fuck is...
Corky, this is Caesar Corky.
I thought... Fucking dark in here.
And the only flaw in my theory is that in the Matrix, in order to be ready for the red pill, you have to already be suspicious that everything is not as it seems. Like Neo and Trinity and Morpheus, they all know something's wrong before they escape the Matrix. I don't think Joey Pants from Bound is going to be suspicious about being in the Matrix, but my theory, I think it works like maybe like 80% of the way there.
Fucking dark in here. Yeah, I mean, you can't buy it. You can't.
I first saw him in La Bamba like in 1987, but goddamn, he's been doing the Lord's work for a long time.
He was Guido the Pimp in Risky Business. That's the first place I saw him.
I saw La Bamba before I saw Risky Business, but I love him in Risky Business. Yeah. And obviously, I love him in Sopranos, and
he's selling Tom Cruise's furniture back at the end of Risky Business.
But was it Jennifer Tilly or was it Gina Gershon who tapped him for this guy? I know one of the actresses vouched for him and roped him in.
Oh, I guess it probably would have been Gina Gershon. That's a good question. Actually, I don't know. Actually, but the chain of command is great because it's like, it's so weird. Joey Pants does this movie, him and his prodigious series of hair pieces at the time.
I'm reading here. It was his first leading role. It's his favorite role. And it was Gina Gershon who recommended him as the role of Caesar.
So Gina Gershon, Joey Pants comes on board. He has the character after character. He'd been doing that for a long time. I mean, he was a sturdy presence. If you're looking for mob guys, you get, Chris Maloney is a little more cartoony in this movie. I think Joey Pants gives a real gritty a lot of insecurity and paranoia. He's kind of like a lot of the engine for the drama in this movie.
Yeah, it's not just like the superficial stereotype of gangsters that we've seen a billion times. He's a real character.
Well, he's shitting his pants. That's what's great. Joey Pants does. He's shitting his Joey Pants.
I gotta think.
Yeah, but then he goes to work. He gets in the Matrix. He plays what's his character in the Matrix? I can't remember. Essentially the Judas character in the Matrix. And then later on, Carrie-Anne Moss goes to work for Nolan on Memento, and they're looking for the guy to move Guy Pearce around. And Carrie-Anne Moss then vouches for Joey Pants again. I said, I think this is the guy you want. I just made this movie called The Matrix with him. And so Nolan hires Joey Pants, and he's fucking incredible in Memento. And it's like, again, this is sort of, I love that chain of like actors doing favor for actors, bouncing, the names off with other people in town, recommending them. That's how you like those. These are two great examples of two movies that like the word of mouth, and you're like, trust me, I got chemistry with these people, and you're gonna have chemistry with them too.
And I'm
like,
sure oftentimes actors are just trying to hook up their friends with work, but it's great when you can see how they're also trying to bring something creatively to the project. Like, not only is he a friend of mine, he's perfect for the part.
Yeah, he was. And it's like, we're living in the Joey Pants world now, that it's hard to remember what a time was like before him. And I mean, this character of Caesar is almost exactly, it informs Ralph Cifaretto in The Sopranos quite a bit. And I think that it was 2004 is when he did Ralph Cifaretto, maybe 2003, 2004. And so a lot of the punch set mannerisms he's doing here is a guy who's talking out his ass, who's just, giving a lot of big Coke energy, but, clearly having no real, the ice underneath him is always thin at any point, which is how he played Ralph. It's great. You get a real dry run here for it.
Well, it's also, it's just a good little gnarly crime thriller where you've got two people that are trying to rip off the mob, but do so in a way where the mob will only point fingers at each other as opposed to pointing fingers at the likely culprits. And of course, it ends up going horribly wrong, and it gets very, very violent and all that good stuff. But man, from like the moment it starts, I think the first 30 minutes probably like the best, because the first 30 minutes is like the initial seduction of and like the relationship, and then the conspiring between the two women, and the rest is kind of like the plot as it unfolds. And all that stuff's really good, really solid, and really strong. But there's no denying that an intense, immediate, phenomenal chemistry between the two female leads, and they just completely, totally sell it. And I think actresses can work for decades and never get apart as well written as this, and it's like it's perfectly cast for them and that sort of thing. And yeah, I don't know how many people know this movie now, but goddamn, it makes so much of the Wachowskis' later work seem pretty mediocre by comparison. Like this versus Speed Racer, I mean, give me Bound all goddamn day. I feel like with the Wachowskis, I love Bound, I love The Matrix, and I like a few of the segments from Cloud Atlas. But otherwise, their careers have been kind of patchy.
Jupiter Ascending, you're including that in there? I'm with you, too.
Which I saw in the theater from one of the earliest episodes of Wrong Reel. I mean, yeah, Parker and Michaela and I, we all went to see that, and we walked out of it like, I mean, we were thunderstruck by just how inept it was across the board.
Well, if you have female friends and if you have gay female friends, believe me, they know this movie. This movie was one of a kind. I mean, I only know this and like David Mamet's, John Sayles' Leanna in terms of movies that are like queer seminal theory for lesbians.
Well, who was the author that they brought in as the technical consultant and kind of like intimacy coordinator?
Susie Bright was in the bar scene, no less, too, but she was there to sort of run her. Yeah, that's extremely forward-thinking of the Wachowski siblings at that point to, like, let's leave it to someone else who might recognize the signposts of what makes this, like, woman-on-woman thing sexier than... Yeah, it seems to be it wasn't just shot for the... it wasn't just shot to... They look incredible nude together. That's... I mean, it is like a top all-timer, top list of 5 sex scenes, I think, just that's two people you want to see naked together simulating.
And it's not even the best take. They had to change the take to avoid the NC-17 rating. Apparently, Jennifer Tilly's hand, you can too clearly see what she's doing with her hand in the takes they wanted to use. But luckily, they had one take where Tilly's body kind of obscures her hand, so that's they were able to keep the shot. And one of the reasons they wanted one long, uninterrupted shot, they worried that Dino De Laurentiis would have inserts if they did like. Which is kind of, par for the course for a lot of Italian film producers, where they'll like take the finished product, like take something like Caligula, and they'll add in a bunch of sex shots after the fact or extreme close-ups. They didn't want to allow that back door to be open. But what a lot of people oftentimes forget is that when you're shooting female nudity between lesbians, like you can do lesbian porn for men who are jacking off to it, or you can actually try to make it for the target audience, like for the women that are involved in it. And I think they recognize, let's make this movie for the audience where they can get off on it. And if the guys enjoy it too, great. But they're not the target
audience. And they do.
Yeah.
No, that's true. That's the best way to put it succinctly, is that's exactly how they approach this. Where it's, if you shoot it for one audience, it's definitely going to work for the other audience too. No doubt in my mind. By the way, you mentioned casting, and that's the thing. When I started looking into this movie, it was so weird that one of the first bits of behind the scenes trivia was that their roles, Gina Gershon and Jennifer Tilly's roles, were supposed to be flipped. Yep. Where Jennifer Tilly came in the door and she was supposed to play Corky.
She was cast first.
She was cast first, and she was going to be the short-haired, sort of smutty-nosed, handy person who winds up being the sort of, tough guy of the role. And Gina Gershon was going to be the sort of femme fatale. But even before that, apparently, the first Violet that they shot for this was, of all actresses, Linda Hamilton.
Interesting.
I can't really see that working necessarily, because Linda Hamilton, she was femmy in certainly a couple of roles, like Terminator. She's really girly, but it's like from 92 onwards, it's like, I think of her as leading with her biceps and a very sinewy. She changes her draft as an actress based on Jim Cameron. And I mean, other than Volcano or whatever, I don't remember too many other things she did, but she's an actor.
Yeah, shit.
It's true. Yeah, Beauty and the Beast with Ron Perlman. I mean, look, you're an actor. You act. You do things you want. You can be girly, be femmy, be butch. I'm sure.
If you need to pack on 20 pounds of curves, then you can pack on 20 pounds of curves.
Yeah, right. It's like grow your hair out. Just make yourself look like a Vava Boom sex kitten the way Jennifer Tilly did. Although Jennifer Tilly reaching for the curvy, kitteny purring, that requires her to reach like 6 inches out from her body because it's right there. She already did so many of these things in so many movies that were probably below her talent or beneath her. And yet for some reason, it's like, this is the perfect use of, like you said, the sound of her voice being that high register and the breathiness. And
she knows how to sway the hips and do the va-va voom routine. I mean, when these aging gangster guys are coming by to spend time with her and that sort of thing, you can totally see her in that role, even if in her own mind she's totally uninterested, but she just admits, like, it's something I'm good at. It's a job, but it's like, it's just what I do for work and for money and that sort of thing. But as good as these two actresses are, I find it impossible to imagine them playing the reverse roles.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's one of those what if things. I can't imagine some of these things. I could wonder. It's like, oh yeah, I could see a version of this. It's like, no, this movie is a legend. I mean, this movie, like you said, maybe it made a few bucks only because it was only seen by a discrete quantity of people back in the day. But it's like, it's hit right now. It has some like insane strike rate in terms of like, it's nearly 100% in terms of like plaudits. If you look on Letterboxd, if you look on all these rating sites, find me the idiot who doesn't like this movie, and it's like, I'll go over there and I'll whap them upside the head with a Nerf bat.
Going back to the idea of Susie Bright, I found this little tidbit over on IMDb. But in 2014, Jennifer Tilly was doing an interview with Vulture about this movie, and she was talking about Susie Bright. She said, I think Susie Bright was consulting with the Wachowskis, and they were asking her what it was like in the lesbian world. The way the sex scene was done had a lot to do with Susie. All of us on the movie were concerned with authenticity. So when Gina goes into the lesbian bar, it's not a bunch of soap opera actresses. It's not a bunch of pretty actresses in hot dresses. It's a real lesbian bar with real people. Even the smallest part, everybody in that was a real person who really hung out in the bar. It wasn't a male fantasy of what a lesbian looks like. But after she made those comments, typical outrage culture, people were furious that she suggested that real lesbians are unattractive and that only the male fantasy of a lesbian would be. But it's like even when you're the star fucking bound and saying something with the best of intentions, people are like, oh, I'm offended, I'm outraged, blah, 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 blah. But I feel like in the end, Jennifer Tilly's going to get the last laugh because she just plays the part so convincingly and she plays it so brilliantly.
The what if for me isn't necessarily what if they flopped their roles, but it's like, why the fuck wasn't Jennifer Tilly used to this kind of expertise and level of greatness either before this or after this, where it's like, I don't remember. I don't know. I saw Jennifer Tilly.
I still say Bullets Over Broadway. She's fucking fabulous. I mean,
okay, yeah. Brilliant. She's great in that movie, but it's. I know that not everybody can get all the roles all the time. There are going to be some great actors who just go more or less unheralded or have their one shot, and like they got to hang a career at the end. They've just been working actors. They go out and make paychecks. They make movies that are good, movies that are bad. It's just that something like this says, oh fuck, we really underestimated what Jennifer Tilly could do. Maybe Jennifer Tilly underestimated what she could do. You know, and it's like if you go back in time to the early 80s and the Tilly sisters came out, you know, they came out fast. It was Meg Tilly came out. She was in Agnes of God. She was in The Big Chill. She was the sort of smaller, more demure. She's like the Winona Ryder looking young. And I didn't realize this is that she's the younger of the two sisters. I thought since we saw Meg Tilly first, she was older than Jennifer, but Jennifer was the older sister. There's a third Tilly sister who's not an actor too. And it's like, you know, like that was one of those early defining parts of like 82, 83, 84, 85, seeing Tillys all over the place. You know, and Meg Tilly kind of dropped out of the business after, I don't think she really worked past 1990.
Whereas Jennifer's still cooking. I mean, she's got 131 acting credits to her name. So it's like maybe she could have been better utilized or had more roles, but it's like the alarming lack of great roles. Like I think we've always had more great actors than we've had more great screenwriters. And in the absence of great screenwriters, just the good roles are in short supply. And I think now we're in a situation where a lot of people, they can't even read or tell the difference between a well-written script and a script that's just fair or kind of serviceable or good.
Amen. Yeah.
And so I don't know how you address the alarming shortage of great writers, but Jennifer Tilly, she could definitely benefited by being an actress in the 1940s and the early 1950s, probably more so than being an actress in the 1990s. But once again, she's made 130 shows and movies. She's made a life for herself in the world of showbiz.
Yeah, I follow her on Insta, and you know, I know there's been a couple of years now. What she almost has done is pretty much retired for the most part. I mean, she's in, I think, her mid 60s. I think she's 64, 65 years old by now. She looks incredible, by the way. I mean, she's ageless. I don't know how it works, but she's fucking ageless. She looks just as much a dime piece now as she did when she was in her 20s. But she only gets out of bed now, for as far as I can tell, for Don Mancini, the guy who really has been working to get her in all the Chucky things that he puts out, the Chucky series. And I mean, I'm sure she does some other things, but really her thing now, she's a competitive poker player and has been on the circuit for like 10 years. And she started out as a dilettante, but she's actually, what they call it, like the bombshell or something like that, where she's actually really good on the felt. She's
some actors get into it, like Tobey Maguire, same thing. He's obsessed with high stick.
He like dropped out. He almost like I'd rather play. I forget what movie he did. Is like after he dropped out, he just spent a decade in the wilderness just playing poker. He said, this is sort of more worthy for me. Yeah, and so she's hooked up with a guy named Phil. His name is the Unabomber on the film. His name is Phil something or other. Phil Lax, I think. And so the two of them are like almost like competitive poker players, and that's where she makes her thing now. I guess she sort of made peace with whatever acting was, does it on the side, and you know, does pretty well for herself if she's got card earnings to fall back on.
Totally. Well, I was going through some of my notes for the flick, and I found this hilarious little time capsule, which I'm sure you'll recognize, but I think for some younger viewers, they'll need a little explanation. But the Wachowskis were talking about the scene where Violet answers the door with her cleavage popping dress after requesting plumbing help, and they said that was their penthouse forum letter. And I have a feeling a lot of people who are like age 29 be like, what's a penthouse forum letter? Explain to people out there, what is a penthouse forum letter and what was the role that it played in the world of adult entertainment in the late 80s and early 90s?
Well, as older readers will know and younger readers may not know, there was a point where we used to put words on paper, and we used to bind that paper into volumes called periodicals or magazines. And among the most fun of them were the ones that were filled with naked ladies and sexual situations and pervy content. Penthouse was Playboy magazine's low-rent cousin, run by a guy named Bob Guccione, who has his own huge rap list of horrible things that apparently he did along the way. But Penthouse did things that Playboy wouldn't. So Penthouse didn't go so far as showing penetration, but it was a lot. There were no articles. There was no George Plimpton. You know, there was no anything like that. You know, you couldn't find pieces by Erica Jong. Erica Jong in Penthouse. But Penthouse had a volume called Penthouse Forum, which essentially was letters to the editor, where people would write letters about their sexual encounters. And you know what it was essentially hack writers were cutting, and they were all men, they were dudes, they were writing these sexual fantasies. It was designed to titillate through the spoken word. That's what Penthouse Forum.
Instead of watching a 60-second porn clip, instead you would read like a 3 or 4 paragraph sexual story with no art or pictures associated. And the first time I heard a Penthouse Forum letter read, well, I was at camp, and my counselor, I won't say which camp or which counselor, but we were all 11 or 12 years old. And he said, everybody, you know, group meeting, everybody come into this room. and he whipped out a penthouse and started reading a story about some guy using what he described as his snatch axe in the context of the story. And we were all just like sitting around, just like confused and bewildered. But by the time I was like 15 or 16, I was a Penthouse subscriber, and I would read the occasional Penthouse forum. And I remember somebody, like an older student, coming by my room in boarding school and making fun of me for reading Penthouse forum and blah, blah, blah. But I found it erotic. So yeah, I am not immune to the erotic allure of these fake, sexual encounters and letters. I can even still remember like the premise and some of the lines of dialogue from some of these things. So yeah, Penthouse forum had an impact on me around age 15 or 16.
Well, it had an impact on young Wachowski siblings as well. I mean, what we haven't even, it's good that you brought that up, because you're talking about the sexual environment that we came up in. And I think the Wachowskis are only maybe like 3 or 4 years older than us. They're probably just poking into their early 50s. So generationally, they came up with the same atmosphere. They were Chicago people. By the way, did you know that their uncle is Cybok from Star Trek V, Lawrence Luckenbill?
I don't know if I would boast and brag about that, because I fucking hated that character, or I hated that movie, but that is an interesting connection.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's really weird. Yeah, apparently it was by marriage. Lawrence Luckenbill married, or something like that.
Yeah, so Lana was born in 1965, and I don't know how, but anyway, so the filmmakers are now pushing 60.
Okay, they're 10 years older than us at least. Yeah. And so that's, you're talking about, they were Chicago people. They were middle class. They grew up sort of in the city of Chicago, I think, or right in the south suburbs near the city center. And again, you can tell their stuff is so rich with genre. So it's so informed by all the same crazy ass shit. I mean, they made a fucking Speed Racer movie. They made The Matrix. They wrote comic books, for God's sake. A lot of people forget that the Wachowskis wrote for the Marvel UK line in the early 90s. They had a comic book called Ecto Kid, which was about a guy who had an eye patch, and apparently one eye saw into one dimension, one eye saw into the other dimension. So he would almost cross between membranes. It was very proto-Matrix-y type stuff. I mean, they were really trying, and they, their big splash was like Tarantino. They wrote a script. They sold a script for Assassins.
Yeah.
The Sly Stallone.
Antonio Banderas, absolutely, and Sly Stallone.
Oh, yeah. Right. And
was it Richard Donner who directed Assassins? I can't remember.
I believe it was Dick Donner. I think you're right about that.
But it was a Joel Silver movie. That's how they got on Joel Silver's radar.
And used to be able, I don't know if they sort of blind submitted a spec script or what, probably, because that's the way these things work. I mean, it's like at one point Tarantino sold a script, and Tony Scott directed it, or fucking Oliver Stone directed it. At one point, you went in there, you cold called people, and you said, "Hey, I got this fucking volume, and you're gonna buy it." And that was the province of the screenwriter. I mean, we talked about Joe Esterhaus on previous episodes. Where
the spec market of the 90s was much more vital and exciting. And admittedly, as somebody who used to read a lot of these specs floating around in the early 2000s, most of them are not worth the paper they were printed on. Sorry,
in retrospect for the work.
But everybody wanted to be Joe Esterhaus, where you can walk into a meeting, write an idea down on a napkin, and sell it for $3 million, like they did for Showgirls. That was the dream. Everybody wanted to be Shane Black. The idea of like the get rich quick. If you can come up with a cool movie idea and you can sell it, and so people were writing original screenplays. Maybe that's what needs to happen, because I feel like now what happens oftentimes is a movie will be like, we're doing a new version of Lord of the Rings for modern audiences, and our release date is summer 2025. Now let's go out and find a writer who can make a corporate friendly bullshit interpretation of our initial pitch with our predetermined release date and that sort of thing. Whereas once upon a time, it was much more the dog was wagging the tail. A screenwriter would sit around, what is my next $1 billion idea, come up with the script, try and sell it, and maybe that would bring back a little more talent to the world of screenwriting if you actually had writers out there with at least the aspiration of selling a cool script, even if it's never going to happen. But I just feel like it has to start with words on the page as opposed to a franchise and a release date. And if you're driven by the franchise and the release date before words on paper, well, then you have no foundation but beneath your project.
No, it's death on a stick. You're essentially building a high rise on a swamp or on desert sand. It's just It's going to buckle and fall into it.
Buildings need a structure, and so do movies.
It needs a foundation. It needs a fucking you got to drive pilings into the fucking swamp, like here in Amsterdam. You got to go down hundreds of feet before you can start building on top of them. But it's like one of the leitmotifs of the '90s. I mean, it's a great tangent to say that the power of the writer, or at least the process of screenwriting, was not only did it make great films, but great writers came out of that foundry. There wasn't just a lot of like one-off pieces of shit script, which there certainly was. Guys who are one-note wonders, or success stories that made one film and couldn't follow back up. But you had great screenwriters who built careers out of hacking out an additional script, and they just like this is a great pipeline.
John Sayles. John Sayles would make his little pet projects, but he was happy to sell his skills and talents anywhere as a hack script doctor. Didn't matter what kind of idiotic movie it was. Like, I will make it a little bit better, and then I'll save up enough money, and I can go off and do Maidawan and In and Out and that sort of thing.
I mean, in a couple of weeks ago on the New Yorker magazine, there was a profile on Scott Frank, the guy who did he wrote Out of Sight. He wrote Logan.
Yeah, exactly.
Queen's Gambit. It's like, that's just what he's doing now. It's like listening to him. He talked about, in my career, I want to emulate Bill Goldman. Yes, Bill Goldman, not Bill Golding. Bill Goldman. And it's like, that is a great fucking model. If you can do it, if you can get that work, that's a great way to do it. It's like you fix their shit. And what that does is that gets the door open for you to write your own shit. And it's like writing Assassins for Dick Donner. Joel Silver bought them the proof of concept to make Bound, and Bound opened the door for The Matrix, and The Matrix changed the game 3 years later. I mean, that is
the last
a great
25
linear success
years. I'm about to make a bold claim, and I'm going to say it without even thinking about it before I have a chance to second guess myself. But in the world of blockbuster filmmaking, in the last 25 years, is The Matrix the best original screenplay written by any filmmakers that's not based? It was inspired by Fist of Legend and Ghost in the Shell and that sort of thing, but is The Matrix the greatest original screenplay in the world of blockbuster franchise filmmaking of the last 25 years?
Yeah, it's hard to think of something that is more successful, bigger, or fits that. I'd have to look, and what I would find, if I found anything, it would be probably a movie that means more to me.
Throw out all the superhero stuff, because all the superhero stuff is based on pre-existing IP. So gone that. Nothing based on a book like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or anything like that, or Twilight or fucking Hunger Games, any of that stupid bullshit. But like all that stuff's based on pre-existing IP. But think of blockbusters that would not exist if not for an original screenplay. Even like Oppenheimer, based on a book. Barbie, based on a toy. The Matrix just came into being due to fingers on the keyboard.
Yeah, I would say that The Matrix is the best. I mean, you can't deny the success of Fast and Furious, which was an original idea. Neil Morris produced the movie.
In the 60s, though, Fast and the Furious was a remake.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Good thing you have a historian's mentality about this thing. No, I think that The Matrix is probably the one of those that you can say there is. And not only that, but it's like,
Jurassic World and all that crap based on Jurassic Park, which is based on a book. It's like, I mean, all this stuff comes from like an earlier version, but The Matrix, it's like when I think of like, what are the great, I want to do a video one day on just the great original screenplays that just came out of nowhere, like 5 Easy Pieces and things like that, where it's just like, these are stories written for the movies as opposed to being adapted for the movies.
Yeah, I mean that's a long ass list, and you got some really good ones in there too.
I think it might even be but a surprisingly short list. Even if you go back to the golden age of Hollywood, when you have all these like world class writers, like people like Ben Hecht, they were oftentimes working on movie adaptations of plays or books that they had written themselves and that sort of thing. It's like even in the great heyday, it's hard to find like the pure original idea that's not based on something that came before. Like Gone with the Wind, based on a best selling book. Casablanca, based on a play. It's like it's hard to find the original productions.
Chinatown, my personal favorite. Chinatown would count. It was an original piece of.
That would definitely be in the top 10 original screenplays, without a doubt.
And that's where your love of Paddy Chayefsky comes into this too, because you can go down. Paddy Chayefsky didn't fuck at anybody. He just more or less made his own shit. He didn't adapt. He came up with these great ideas that were his along the way. 100%. The thing is,
another topic for another day, but it's a juicy one. But the Wachowskis, they at least can lay claim to that achievement in ways that other blockbuster directors working for all the big studios these days, they do not have the same claim to fame.
No, but they came up in the same soil as Tarantino, where it's like, I'm swimming around in Star Trek, I'm swimming around in Matt Helm movies, but it's like, what I really want to do is my own shit. And so Tarantino has always made his own stuff, and the Wachowskis really were pretty resolute. They made one, I guess Speed Racer's an adaptation. Cloud Atlas was a book adaptation. But they have been,
and they were basically had a gun to their head to make the fucking fourth Matrix, and the only reason they came back and did it was because if not, they were going to hire somebody else to do it.
That was just Lily that made. Yeah, I think that was both of the siblings did not work on that. And I don't think Lana came back for it. It was only Lily. It was like Joel and Ethan not doing their work anymore.
But
that's why
the movie was going to get made one way or another, and she's like, "Oh,
yes,
fuck." So
if it's going to be a failure, it's going to be my failure, and it was essentially. It didn't work too.
It sucked.
Yeah, but it's a great origin story. That's the thing. Like Bound, coming back to that idea that Bound is just a perfectly designed noir movie that just happens to be set in 1996 with queer elements, which is what drags it. And it's like the forefront. It's like the new 90s technology where you got gay sex in it, and it's like sells to again everybody who sees it loves this thing, and there's really no detractors, and it's slick, and it's Bill Pope. Everything you were saying before about the photography, Bill Pope, the same guy who shot the 3 Matrix movies.
Yep.
And it's Don Davis, the same guy who did the score for this movie, scored the 3 Matrix movies. Those are real relationships that keep going. And so very much the DNA for the Matrix is in more ways than one begins with Bound. That Joel Silver relationship's all right there.
It makes me wonder, everybody always talks about how making a cool, low budget horror film is a great way to get your career started. It shows, it's a commercial space, it's viable, they're low budget, blah, blah, blah. But imagine a different world where instead of going out and making your cabin in the woods type movie with a bunch of teenagers getting killed while boning each other, what if instead people decided to make hard-boiled erotic thrillers, gay, straight, or everything in between? I feel like that would be a great little renaissance where instead of everybody thinking, oh, I need to make the next Talk to Me, I need to make the next Bound. I mean, Bound cost $6 million. It's not exactly like a low budget down and dirty movie, but it had enough where it could have some production value. But I feel like sometimes people overlook the commercial possibilities of a down and dirty erotic thriller, and Bound 100% qualifies. I think it's one of the best thrillers.
It's funny you mention that because I think James Wan went on to do Aquaman. Did he direct Fast and Furious? Or am I thinking of Justin Lin?
He did the seventh one. Yeah,
he did the seventh one.
The most successful one. Guys
like Lee Wanell came out of the Blumhouse machine, and he winds up doing a movie like Invisible Man, which is really good. And, it's like these guys are. What is it? Fede Alvarez, another guy that came. What was he? The Uruguayan guy or Colombian? I forget where the fuck.
He did the Evil Dead remake or the first Evil Dead remake.
Yep. And David Sandberg, who did what is it? Don't Breathe, and then he did Flash. Not Flash. He did Shazam.
Even if the entire movie business were to collapse into obscurity, horror films would still get made.
And that's the thing that's the feeder system of these directors are coming out of micro budget horror or Spanish language, foreign language horror, Spanish language in particular. And it's like, that is the ground where it produces these directors. And it's like, and I don't want to, I like horror just fine. I don't love it, but horror winds up being something I think that produces pretty myopic directors. It's not every single director who comes out of horror who's kind of ready to jump genres. It seems like some of these guys are pretty calcified into the routines of horror, and so they don't make really successful movies.
And their work feels derivative, and it's like, oh, I can tell which horror films you grew up watching.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same ones we all wind up watching, but it's like, show me someone who's a fucking ballet dancer who could zip from one genre to the next, and I have no idea that, oh, Jesus, you made Insidious 2. Okay, great. Maybe that's a good movie. And Conjuring #3. And it's like, oh, but then you also made, like you said, an erotic thriller or something that was like a neo-noir. And it's like, prove to me that you could jump genres without taking a stop off at Shazam or The Flash or wherever those, again, horror movie directors that come out. David Sandberg was Swedish, and Andy Muschietti, I think, is from Argentina. Those guys, they broke into American movies doing genre stuff.
What I would love to see happen, and I feel like some filmmakers are already doing this, but like in the world of adult entertainment, you do have some performers and writers and directors who occasionally will introduce like ingredients and production value that nobody's asking for, but they're putting it in there all the same because they want it to feel more like a movie as opposed to just like something where you fast forward to the juicy bits or just film the juicy bits. But it would be really, really cool if somebody came out of the AVN Awards and was like, you know what, moving forward, I've made all this money making porn, but now I'm going to make erotic thrillers that are actually aspiring to do more than just have people, masturbate and that sort of thing. Because I don't know. Because we have the proliferation of online adult entertainment, there's not as much of a pent-up demand for erotic thrillers as it was in the 80s and 90s, where that was one of the only outlets and that sort of thing. So I almost feel like you would need the adult entertainment industry to decide as a group, we want to try and make some low-budget genre films that also happen to employ the things that we already are doing really, really well. But it would be interesting to see if any of those if any of those performers or filmmakers would ever have any like kind of a genre aspirations beyond just doing adult entertainment.
And yet, like you say, the idea that you can find your carnal satisfaction in somebody like just sort of pure hardcore or overtly sexual stuff. And yet, that did not stop me from watching I was going to date this episode, but it's like watching the Roadhouse trailer this week and saying, this is not going to work because this is completely devoid of sleaze. This is completely devoid of fuck. It's going to have so little nudity in it, and it's going to be anti-sex.
How would you like to get nipple to nipple? She's like, I can do that without you. Like, like lines like that. Yeah. The original Roadhouse is a wonderful, beautiful thing, and it leans into the wonderful, beautiful exchange of bodily fluids and that sort of thing. And it's fucking awesome. And I knew once they announced Roadhouse is coming, I was like, or lack thereof, that they would never in a million years dream of drifting in. It's an Amazon. I mean, Amazon's not going to make a randy redneck extravaganza like fucking Roadhouse. But sadly, Roadhouse will never come up in our naughty 90s nostalgia list because it's a 1989 movie.
That is true, but there's a goodly amount of nudity in it that is all. And I think that we started off by talking about Poor Things. And, there is still the capacity for people to want, and seeing Barry Kogan's schwang in fucking Saltburn. People want to see this stuff. It still sells. They just don't give it to us. That's the only difference, is that, of course, you can go out and watch all the vivid video shit you want to see. But it's like, come on, man. This stuff still sells. It still moves tickets. It still put asses in seats. And people still want to see this stuff. It doesn't have to be pornographic. It's like put naked bodies and fucking inside movies that we want to see, because that's part of the vocabulary of human. I don't get into car crashes. That's not part of my life. Yet I see them in movies. And it's like, put sex in movies too, because that's also part of regular stuff.
Netflix will occasionally dabble in the world. 365 Days was pure trash. But it was a movie in that environment, and it got serious clicks. It was wildly popular in spite of all of its shortcomings thematically and that sort of thing. So they're out there. I feel like it's going to boil down to we got to put our faith and our hope in independent filmmakers, because Apple, Amazon, Netflix are these big studios. Their brands are too valuable to risk their reputation on sleazy movies. However, if a young filmmaker in their late 20s, early 30s scrapes together $1 or $2 million and makes a movie like Blue's the Warmest Color or anything along those lines, takes it to a film festival and says, like, hey, look, we're open for business. Would Neon or A24, any of these companies, like to buy it? I think that's how you get it. But I don't trust that Warner Brothers Discovery or Paramount, CBS, or any of these companies would ever dream of making this kind of content, because they're just so boring and so cautious and so conservative and so limited in their echo chamber of groupthink that none of this crap is ever going to get made in that kind of soil.
And of course, we're talking about what won't happen until it does. And then all of a sudden, every single, prognosticator and every single predictor is just like, they're proven dumbfounded by the fact that something that had rarely happened before is happening. And of course, that's the weird thing. It's like, was there supposed to be a weekend where Miyazaki and Godzilla -1 were like crushing, arguably
both in the top 5 on the same weekend? I was like, that's unusual. 2 Japanese releases in the top 5 in America on the same fucking weekend. Like, all hope is not lost. It's very easy to get cynical, like, movies suck, they used to be better. But that's not always the case. I think it's interesting that Godzilla -1 and The Boy and the Heron could both do well at the same time.
As I'm saying, weird shit that happens that's not supposed to happen. The fact that Sydney Sweeney movie, where what is that breezy sex comedy that takes place in Australia? It's like that was
like $70 million. Yeah,
it's really it's legged out so far. It's doing pretty well. It's like these things are not supposed to work until they do work.
It's
and then
the
all
most
of a sudden,
successful R-rated comedy in 5 years in terms of box office.
That's strange. That's what I'm saying. It's like, it's weird because you kind of have the feeling that at some point, like Sydney Sweeney herself has sort of been very voluntary. She's pushed the idea of, it's like, I'm willing to get naked for these movies. I have no problem with Mike. And thank God, because she looks incredible. And it's like, she realizes that this is interesting. It helps sell movies. And she still does shit on the side, like the Reality Winner biopic. So it's like, she's getting a chance to, she was in White Lotus.
Season 1 of White Lotus. Perfect example. Yeah. Season 1 of White Lotus. She doesn't show any skin at all. And she was fantastic in it.
And the beauty of it is that an actor can feel confident that they're not going to get chewed up. They can get chewed up by the wheels. Again, maybe it's easy for me to say, but it's like, you can do nude scenes, you can do real sexual stuff. Alexandra Daddario had a career after doing full nude in season 1 of True Detective, and she's
you and I could get nude right now, and we would live to tell the tale. We we would not have to retire in shame and infamy.
Only if you play the Shadowrun theme under it, so you don't have to hear the noises of me moaning.
I took my shirt off for my thumbnail for the Iron Claw.
White Claw, Iron Claw, yes.
Yeah, so I'm not afraid. One day I will do a live stream with 4 men who've got their own set of tits, but just from too much booze and fatty diet and that sort of thing. So for future episodes of Naughty 90s Nostalgia, I feel like you came up with 3 bangers for this. I was looking at some of the movies that have not been covered yet, and you mentioned Jade earlier, but some contenders. Undercover Heat.
Oh, we did Jade already. Actually, we did it. Yeah.
Yeah, it actually was included.
Yes, we did it.
Which episode? I have no memory of talking about Jade with you.
It was the last one, Naughty 90s 4. We did Jade.
Really? Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm getting senile. But what about we got the Hot Spot, which could be a contender.
Oh God damn.
Embrace of the Vampire with like the perpetually canceled Alyssa Milano. I got Lost Highway with Patricia Arquette.
Another good one.
But Undercover Heat, I feel like it represents a particular brand of Naughty 90s nostalgia that I think a lot of people just won't remember. That the idea that you could walk into a Blockbuster, and even though they had a strict ban on NC-17 content, they had the weird softcore mystery section with just dozens, if not hundreds, of videos that were all kind of murder stories that all had a hint of nudity, but none of them got like too extreme in any one direction. But it's how actresses like Shannon Tweed were able to make vast sums of money just making all these straight-to-video cheapies, but they were fucking fun to watch.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I watched, friend of the show, Matthias Van Der Roos, watched a movie called The Jigsaw Murders with Chad Everett from 1989. And I remember this being on HBO like late at night, and it's like there's nudity for no reason. It's lurid. It's violent. It's exactly the kind of thing. It's a mixture of sex and violence. And it was definitely shot on a shoestring. If you had an actor like Chad Everett in there, who was like soap opera also ran, there's no shortage of these like late night cheapies that went to video or were designed to be shown on either Showtime, Cinemax, or HBO if you were lucky.
Well, luckily Criterion keeps rediscovering them. And so I feel like, I think our podcast about Naughty 90s nostalgia will age very well as a niche audience recognizes that something has been lost, that these movies went away, and that it just needs to be part of the overall media landscape. It shouldn't dominate, but it just needs to be an option. It needs to be around, and it can lead to filmmakers having very bright careers. But where can people find some of your offerings in terms of YouTube videos, podcasts, Daily Cobra Commander, all that stuff? If people want to hear you opining more on these topics.
It's a lot. It's too much, you might even say. But I'm on Twitter at William Scurry. I'm on Instagram, the same thing, at William Scurry. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Blue Sky. My video content's on YouTube at youtube.com/AM Caesar. I'm on Film 89 with our old friend Sky Wingfield and Neil Gaskin all the damn time. I got my own podcast called I Don't Get It at No One Bill Show on Twitter, but that's not really movie based. We 45 minutes to look at a pop culture issue du jour of the week. So that's a little bit of a different discussion. But yeah, I'm also on our friend Carlo Labrador Pangalangan. I'm on Movie Food all the goddamn time too. I'm really happy that he keeps inviting me out there. So there's no shortage of Bill Scurry's hot air on the internet.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to whatever Naughty 90s Nostalgia 6 might entail. And we don't have to wait a year to do it. I mean, I like this topic. And I'll be back in a couple of weeks with Robert Amara talking about the career of Catherine Briat, who makes most Naughty 90s entries seem very tame and milquetoast by comparison. She's like, a traumatizing filmmaker in many ways, but she also did have some movies in the 90s that he and I will be getting to in the not so distant future. But we hope y'all have enjoyed this conversation. Don't feel shy. Go back and hunt down some of our old episodes of Naughty 90s Nostalgia that are linked down in the description below. But we can't thank you enough for watching. But more important, as always, onwards and upwards.
It ain't like it used to be, but it'll do.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.